Okay, I will get started and introduce a few people and then get rolling. So today I think I'll start with a few slides and then Brian's got three and then we'll move on to Racey and hear his presentation there. So thanks everyone for joining us and thanks to Brian Kennedy, the Canterra Seeds Alberta rep. And we've also got Blair Balog with Stamp Seeds on the call here. And we've got Racey Padilla, who's the small grains research director, essentially the breeder with TriCal. So, and he's based out of Texas, right? So, yeah, so covers a lot of area, I suppose. Very diverse from all the way there to all the way north into Canada here with some of the products they would be dealing with. So welcome, and we'll get rolling on my presentation here. So triticale, what we're going to be talking about today, basically it's a cross of wheat and rye. So it's been around for a while. It's kind of not, I wouldn't say it's really super popular in Western Canada as a forage, and mainly more of a cow-calf thing, but not really as a big feedlot type of thing. So I think there's some room to grow in that area. That's Brian and myself in the crop this summer. And on the right there is our member of parliament, Martin Shields. And Martin's not a super tall guy, and we almost lost him out there. So, um, just in general, these charts, as you can see, are pretty old, but it's some Alberta agriculture information that was done a while ago. I think it still pertains today because in these charts you've got CPS wheats, which is pretty similar to the soft wheats we're growing today. Obviously, yield gains have been made with all of these varieties and the new varieties that have replaced them. But what I wanted to showcase here was in drier conditions, the yield differential between triticales and wheats. So generally, you're going to have those yield gains with trits versus wheats in dry situations. And then that silage digestibility chart, just how does that compare to oats, triticale, barley, which is some of the things you might be comparing or replacing, say a trit with some of those crops. But I would say a lot of our customers, the trit would be replacing either a corn because of drought risk issues or a soft wheat in the rotation. Would be kind of the main two crops that people would be kicking out in order to plant a triticale. This chart on the left there was actually, I believe, in the US. Oh, yeah, in Colorado, it looks like. And it was just compared, it's an older chart. It compared corn, millet, and triticale, and just in water use efficiency, just total kgs per millimeter of water used. On the right there, that's the surge variety. Uh, in general, we've been dealing with triticales for a number of years on our farm. I would say, I think in recent times, the Sunray would be the most recent one. And it had an on, they called it kind of a softer on, but it still had ons. Some were using it for silage, some for grain. It was kind of a multi-purpose variety. Not super tall, so in dry conditions, it was maybe a little shorter than some people wanted. There's an up and coming one, kind of as a grain forage flex. I think it's going to be a little shorter than the surge, and this is out of the Lacombe breeding program in Alberta here, and it's a couple of years away from market. Not sure when it's going to launch actually, and I'm not sure how it's going to fit into what we're selling. But just keep in mind it's up and coming. And the pictures there, we used a growth regulator to keep them a little shorter and a very low plant population because we were planting breeder seed to produce select status seed. So very low population. So it wouldn't look the same as these pictures necessarily once we have the proper populations.
Is TriCal Surge Triticale. It's a spring triticale, smooth on, no beards. It's a really nice looking variety that's available this winter. And it's tall. This is on kind of a little bit of a hilltop. Further down, you can see a little bit of lodging. We did use a PGR on this as well. And in the lower areas, it would be probably 5 to 6 feet tall. So for us, it's one of our taller, high biomass triticales we've ever sold.
So that was a video I did this summer, probably before I knew too much about the variety, but probably encapsulates it a little bit. So Surge, brand new, coming out, well, right now, it's available right now. It's forage only. It's kind of that type of a variety, which I like to have a real specific variety because it's tough to have these multi-use varieties where it's like, well, it's okay for this or it's okay for that. I love it when it's just this is what it does and it does it well. So it's tall. If you have irrigation or higher fertility, I would almost suggest a PGR unless you're not so concerned about lodging. No-ons. I don't quite know what we should be targeting for plants per square foot, so I'm going to be learning something later from the third presentation here today. And it's a certified seed only program. So when you buy seed, you can't farm save it. Is that correct, Brian? Yeah. Okay. So this picture here is kind of on an oil well gravel road allowance. It's standing pretty good there. If you kind of go over the hill there, it's kind of got some lodging in the draw on the other side of it there. But phenomenal looking variety. So who's the customer for this variety? I would say anyone that's wanting big forage yields, dryland or irrigation. I think on dryland, you're going to get the height you need in dry situations. I mean, triticales can handle drier conditions better than durum or better than other crops. I thinking of durum, I had a customer that was growing some triticale and they were growing some durum and they were taking both to grain. The triticale was almost double the yield of the durum in a dry situation. So it was phenomenal, the grain yield. So and tonnage wise versus say a wheat crop for silage, I would say we would get that kind of a not quite that big of a gap, but close to that. That's person who wants the silage, green feed, swath grazing. I would say most of our customers are silage acre customers, but definitely there are people that are doing the green feed and swath grazing thing, which this would be perfect for. And then a little bit earlier silage timing versus soft wheats. So if you want to save that last 3/4 inch of irrigation or just get it to the silage timing with the water you have, I think that like the trits in general, you can take them off a little bit earlier versus say a soft wheat when you're waiting for that dough stage. You might be able to go at more of a milk to early dough versus soft wheats or winter wheats. You want to be more at that full dough stage for silage to get your top tonnage. So with triticale, I think you're going to get some water savings on that final irrigation or in dry conditions on dry land. A little earlier, I think it could be easier to do a double crop because you might be able to get this off a little earlier than a soft wheat if you did want to try and double crop with a spring product. If you're doing that, you're going to want to plant this early April so that you can get it to the point you need to. Definitely easier with a winter crop to double crop than a spring crop. But if there's anything like this versus soft wheat, best chance would be with a triticale, I would say. I've seen phenomenal results on dryland with triticales. It seems like they even get growing in drier soils versus wheats in dry soils or other crops like that. I was reading somewhere the other night that you can reduce lodging risk by seeding early. So that was some research by I think Ross McKenzie and Eric Bremer were involved with, and that can help reduce lodging risk. They were saying similar fertility to wheat, but I'm going to ask Racey some fertility questions as well in the third presentation. So I would say similar to wheat to maybe less because it's a more efficient user, more of a scavenger versus say a wheat crop. And yeah, you could blend with forage peas, clovers if you want to boost that protein in the crop. And just the challenge is herbicides. How do you spray that crop? So you have to pick a pretty clean field if you're going to be blending with a broadleaf. And then registered herbicides on triticale, there's not as many registered as on wheat. So definitely before you go spray, look at the blue book, just make sure what you're spraying is registered on trit. Generally, I don't think there's an issue, but it's just what's registered or not. And nearing the end here, typical seeding rates. This is an old chart, and they don't even talk about plants per square foot in it. That's how old it is. But they're talking about, kind of what your use rates and what you could blend it with and kind of general numbers as far as pounds per acre. Yeah, typically it's a later maturing crop is what I was seeing. I don't know if I've really seen that I think that's more for grain yields, not really for forage from what I've seen. We've had some trits that are, heading out similar times to wheats. So, and it said seed as early as May 15th for maximum yield. Well, I would say April 1st if you can go. but I'd have to look up what the frost tolerance of trid is versus wheats. I don't really know that, so maybe that's something I got to dig into before I say if you can drive, then seed. These plots here are demo plots. The next slide has some charts that Blair did. So you can see this plot's a little short. The seed size on this Triticale variety we were trying was so big that we actually ran out of seed. We had to bump the seeding rate so high that we actually ran out of seed at the front. So we corrected our yields in our demo plots. But here you've got soft wheat. So we've got 3 varieties of soft wheat here in the red signs. And then we've got the Sunray here. And then here we've got the T293. And then we had some new varieties from the Field Crop Development Center over here. We didn't get the surge in this trial because we actually planted this before we even got surge seed. So we couldn't put it in here actually. So next year it'll be in our demo plots that we take to forage and to grain yields. Here's Hannah on the left and Blair on the right. They are cutting. So what they've done is they go and cut a 3 foot by 10 foot or 5 foot by 10 foot block out of there. And they go and basically send it to the lab for moisture. So they weigh it, send it to the lab, get the moisture correction so we can get a rough comparison. And this is a farmer side by side. This is not science. Our results one year to the next may not correlate necessarily. We're not scientists. This is a farmer side by side. So it's good information and it's farmed how we and our customers are farming. So that's why it has some value. What Blair found, we didn't take all the FCDC because they're not available in the marketplace right now. So it's just products that are available or very close to the marketplace. And in this season, the soft wheats didn't do quite as good as some of the triticales did for total tonnage. And then he's got some total nutrients available. There's full nutrient analysis on our website that Blair posted and has on stampseeds.com. And you can see what all the nutrients available in our trials page on our website. So you can see the new T293, and then some of these new varieties, they're not even on the marketplace yet. So kind of ignore them because who knows when and where they'll be available past registration. So generally the Triticale did well, and we had some stress in these plots. So we did a late PGR in these plots, and it stressed out some of the crops. I'm thinking the Triticale could handle the stress better than the soft wheats could. So I think that's part of it. So this is one of our surge seed production fields from this past year. You can definitely see there is spots where we had a little bit of lodging. Now we planted this kind of late. It was near the very end of our planting. So it was kind of mid-May for us. And I would not recommend planting at the end. I would plant this more at the start of our seeding if I had the choice. So definitely a little bit of lodging in spots, but it didn't quite tiller out as much as I think it could have. And our seeding rate was a little lower than I was anticipating. So I got to figure out where that prime seeding rate is. And I don't know if we know that for sure yet, what our plants per square foot target should be. Here's harvest. The yields were not as big as some of our other Triticale varieties for grain, but that's okay. It's a forage specific variety. So for customers, as long as the forage yields are good, we can tolerate a little bit of lower seed yield when we go and harvest this. So this is the first time we had 4 combines in one field actually on our farm. So they all met up in the surge at the end of the season. So, but it was planted last, so it kind of got harvested last.
Amazing looking heads. If you look here, just massive head size. This variety is going to be a forage specific variety. It's tall. We used a PGR here on irrigation and it's still about 5 feet tall. It is going down a little bit in some spots because, higher fertility and forage type. Typically to be silaging about now. It's not flat, it's just laying down a little bit in spots. So it's actually probably just perfect. You may want to consider a PGR if doing it on irrigation though, because even with that PGR and not the highest plant stand, we're still about 4.5, 5 feet tall here, and probably the lowest spots are even a little higher. So
I think that's one of my last
amazing
slides.
looking heads.
And that's it. That's my last slide. So any comments or questions from anyone before we move into Brian's? Brian, go ahead and cue yours up as well. But any comments? Someone can unmute and ask if you like.
I have a comment, Greg.
Yes.
It it will be interesting to try to figure out a different seeding rate for seed growers for seed production versus somebody who wants to take it as a forage. There could be some adjustment in there, and it'll be interesting going forward how this gets worked out.
Yeah, that's true. I kind of forgot that you could have different rates for a seed production versus forage. Yeah. Well, and forage timing too. Like, I mean, in a perfect world, I would say that a farmer would like taking it for forage would say, well, we want to be right on the edge of lodging, right? Like then you got the biggest crop possible without dealing with problems. So how do you get to that point, right on the edge of lodging for optimum yield and production? So at forage timing, I mean, we're taking it longer than a forage person would, right? So yeah. Well,
Thanks, Greg.
seeing,
Oh,
yeah, go ahead, Brian.
was there a question?
No, that was me.
Okay, so thanks, Greg. That was great. And thanks for the introduction. I just wanted to reintroduce myself. I'm Brian Kennedy, the pedigreed seed territory manager with Canterra Seeds for Alberta. And I'm going to just be really quick. Last year, we became a distributor of TriCal Surge, something that we're really excited about because we think it has a great fit for a lot of places in Western Canada. And looking at the snowpack uh, currently in the mountains and the prospect of a possibly reduced amount of water for irrigation was really interesting. The data you shared on how well Triticale can do in a drier year. So I think that's something that could be really relevant for especially people in southern Alberta. So yeah, it's widely adopted for Western Canada. Open pollinated variety, really, really good forage or silage yield potential. As Greg mentioned, it can be swath grazed as well, which being an awnless variety is pretty relevant for farmers who take that route. Shorter straw with excellent standability. We'll see. As Greg said, they planted at a lower rate, which can lead a lower seeding rate in 2023, which can lead to more lodging. And it was under irrigation, which again can lead to more lodging issues. Excellent silage quality, good TDN and crude protein, and a good dry matter content, and it is resistant to leaf rust. And
Hey, Brian.
yes,
One comment on your last slide. I'm wondering if shorter straw, maybe that's compared to some really older traditional varieties in the Western Canadian marketplace. Because, like, I mean, I've been used to dealing with some of these shorter semi-dwarf trits almost, and so maybe this is somewhere in between, is my guess.
it could be. This may be out of compared to what's available in the US as well,
Okay.
where they could have. I know TriCal does have a couple of other varieties that are even shorter. So yeah,
Okay. Well, and even seeding rate, like our seeding rate was probably normal-ish. It was just a little lower than we typically go out on our farm. So
right,
yeah,
right.
so it wasn't a terrible rate. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it wasn't flat when you
No,
harvested it, so that's a
no.
good thing. Um, so recommendation customized for local marketing initiatives for shareholders, seed growers, retailers. This is a new opportunity for Canterra shareholders to grow this for their customers as an annual forage or cover cropping. There it could be some minor use opportunities for rehabilitation of oil lease sites. And as Greg will tell you, I am not from the government, but I'm still here to help. And thank you. I don't want to take up any more time from the good information we're going to get from Racey.
If any of you on the Zoom today are growing this, I'm sure Brian would happily come out to your field and take a look at some pictures this summer. So if you are growing it and you want myself or Blair or Brian, come take a look. Happy to come take a peek this summer. So, and yeah, Racey, you're up whenever you're ready. I appreciate you coming on today and talking about this. We always learn a lot when we get the people that are really involved in the higher level of making these varieties.
Thanks for having me. I'm kind of a Triticale nerd, so I can go on for hours talking about Triticale and all the great things that I think we're improving upon it and moving forward. But can you see the screen fine?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Um, Again, I'll reintroduce myself as well. I am the Small Grains Research Director for TriCal Superior Forage. That sounds like a really cool title, but basically I'm just a plant breeder, to sum it up. I'm going to qualify some things here. I don't have a ton of experience in Canada. Everything that we have, our experience is obviously in the United States. And specifically with Surge as a spring plant, most of our testing is done, as close to the border as we could get, and some of the stuff probably will translate pretty easily for you guys. But we're learning more about the different farming practices and fertility rates and all the different soils. There's so many different aspects that I'm still trying to learn moving forward. But I look forward to spending more time in Canada and collaborating with growers and customers to really figure out which varieties work best for you guys. All right, I'm through with my sales pitch. I'm not a salesman. I'm a plant breeder. So let's move on with the cool stuff. I want to do some. Oh man. Well, this kind of steals my thunder. Behind this picture here, there's another. There's actually a different head top. But let's just talk head top. I use three different terms for head: on, which is fully bearded, on-leaded, and onless. And this is just an example of some that you guys are probably familiar with that are considered, Metzger is probably considered onless. In the States, we have customers that have competitive varieties that have this type of expression of the beard or the on, and they would get by with selling that as an onless type. But for TriCal, we developed the onless trait in Triticale. I say I was probably wearing short shorts and wiping my snotty nose still when this was developed, but the credit still goes to TriCal. The onless trait, let's just move through these. The onless trait was actually developed through a mutation breeding process to basically, and it used 6 different trait loci, big talk, genetic big talk, but basically 6 different spots in the DNA to actually knock the ond completely off of the gloom. So basically the fully ond, when I say ond, it's this type. On-leaded can still have a few very short beards on it, and most people would still consider that onless, but I have to rate these on a scale of 1 to 9 just for my breeding purposes. So I call those on-leaded types. And then you'll see here the truly onless has no beard at all. What we found out though was with the downfall with the onless trait is we actually were having trouble pulling through high yielding or high biomass producing varieties with the onless trait. We found out there's a linkage that actually reduced yield, and we're really kind of beat my head against the wall and trying to figure this out. And this was part of my first project working with Triticale, was to try to figure out how to boost the yield of the onless types. So what I figured out was the yield reduction was coming from tillering. So the lack of tillering, there was, somewhere in the neighborhood of 15%, 10 to 15%, in some cases in the extreme 20% less tillering in those plants that had the onless trait in it. So I had to go back with a hypothetical DNA hammer and try to break those linkages. And as far as breaking those linkages, Surge was probably one of the first ones that came through the program that we could actually start seeing significant improvements on tillering with the onless trait. And then you know, if we could progress through what we have now that's coming out in the next couple of years, I'd significantly increase the tillering on those. But you guys won't get to see those as fast as they will in the US because your variety, your PBR process is a little slower than the US. So it takes a little longer for us to get those varieties to you guys. All right. I'm probably going to focus more on more of what I've learned for as far as agronomics and ways to manage triticale that I've seen that certain people can improve their processes. But some of this is going to be probably redundant. Maybe you're already putting this into your practice, and I'm just and I'm beating a dead horse here. But there's so many things that I've picked up with triticale that most customers have never really thought about it. Specifically in the U.S., they kind of treat trit still as a stepchild type crop, and so they put it on their crappier ground, and they don't treat it like a premium product. So they don't put seed treatments on it. They fertilize it very low, as small quantities of fertilizer they can put on it. Then they'll really try to hit the bottom number on the fertility program. But we've taken some time and really looked at some of this stuff and figured out what works best if you're really trying to boost your forage. And this is forage specific. I won't talk much about grain because I think, you know, for this call, most of the customers here are probably going to be forage specific customers. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Okay,
Oh,
so
that's good. Forage specific.
sure.
And I would agree with you on the comment on put it on poorer ground. I mean, I think people were trying to solve poorer ground crop issues by with a crop of some kind. So they're putting trit there. And I think it just kind of gets branded that way. Whereas, yeah, we've seen it with like even rye. It's like, oh no, it does amazing on good ground. I think we would see the same thing with trit.
Sure, absolutely. So seed treatments, I'm a big believer in seed treatments. And again, I don't know what's your normal practices are. I feel like a lot of the customers I deal with, and you know, the further we go north, it seems like you guys are a little more progressive than some of the guys in southern United States. But applying a fungicide is a big deal to me. I want to apply a fungicide that has at least 2 active ingredients in it, not find the cheapest fungicide that just has 1 active ingredient, because there's so many different types of gunk, without getting too technical, in the soil that not just one can always protect. And then if you're an early grazing guy, an addition of insecticide. Now that's true. Again, that's true for a lot of the people in the U.S. because this is probably geared more towards the fall planted guys, because we get a really early infection of green bugs, and they get infested in green bugs, and green bugs here carry so many different vectors, barley yellow dwarf, and there's lots of things that can affect the overall quality of the forage product and recovery at that early stages of grazing. But we were owned by Syngenta for several years, and because we were owned by a chemical company, we had to do a lot of chemical times G, basically chemical times genetic testing. So if they could boost the way to find a way to boost chemical cells and also couple our genetics together, then that's what the whole idea was to try to package things together. But since we did those trials, we did a 2-year study, basically using just their standard fungicide treatments and basically measured biomass. We had some assumption that there was some biomass increase in certain areas of the U.S. that we were not getting those heterotic effects with the new lines, because there was some other stuff that was going on in the soil. So there was a lot of dampening off and issues with the seedlings that were, because triticale is tougher than some other small grains crops. It was getting through those processes, but we're actually seeing some significant boost if you could just protect that seedling moving forward. So we found out we actually had some what we call overexpressors, and we were seeing these huge jumps in tonnages. And now this is boot stage tonnage. which is pretty favorable for what most people like to cut in the plains. And specifically dairy customers like that boot stage cut to cut forage. But this is a boot stage trial we did for 2 years, and we got some pretty significant results. So this is just an example of what if you try to protect that crop with a fungicide, you might actually see some additional results. Again, this is plains data. I'm assuming you could probably see this boost also somewhere in Canada as well. And this is fall planted material, not spring planted material. So being in the soil that longer growing season, every time you can protect it, you're going to have a little more advantageous growth. All right, seeding rate. I've done some seeding rate studies, and we can get really lost in the seeding rate study. So I won't spend too much time, but for our fall planting guys, we predominantly, this is just across the board. There's certain areas we can actually lower the rate, certain areas there's reasons to increase the rate. But across the board, fall planting, we've always recommended somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1.2 million seeds per acre, or right around 28 plants per square foot. This is forage, again, not seed production. And what we've seen in, the more arid dryland areas, we've had pretty good success with dropping that rate to 900,000 seeds per acre, and having the ability to increase tillering potential in that area with that lower seeding rate is still there, because triticale tends to make up sometimes with tillering what you wouldn't get with the plant population being reduced. So, but predominantly 1.2 million for fall planting. But for spring planting, you want to bump that rate somewhere around 20 to 25%. And the reason you want to do this is because you don't have the big, long, drawn out season to create all this tillering, especially in the fall. Your fall months, you get 2 or 3 months of really good growth to put on a lot of tillers, get a crown development, root development. There's all these things that plant goes through. And because it has certain amounts of vernalization requirement, it's not going to go into the reproductive stages. So it's putting all this big growth on in the fall. You don't get that in the spring, because a spring variety is basically from the day it starts growing, it's trying to hustle as fast as it can to maturity. Because there's not a lot of triggers like cold triggers like you have with a winter type crop. Or photo period sensitivities that are also in certain winter crops to boost it, to tell it to go to reproductive stage. So this one, springs are always trying to get to reproductive as fast as they can. So basically, it's a racehorse in the springtime, and you can make up for some of the yield losses that you might potentially have with a spring planted crop with additional plant population. Now, historically, small grains especially in the US, have been talked about as how many pounds per acre. And I absolutely despise pounds per acre because specifically with triticale, there's some very vast different seed sizes. And here's a great example. I think 3 years ago, I was trying to release a variety that looked fantastic over a pretty large area. And I started seeing it kind of fall off there for a couple of years, and it looked like the tillering aspect of it was very low, or there was something wrong with the seeds. So I actually went back and started looking at it, and we did this measuring where we're actually looking at how many pounds per acre that particular variety was producing. And Thor is actually the variety that I'm talking about. Again, not available to you guys, but Thor is a huge seeded variety. It's somewhere around 64 to 66 pound test weight. Very large seed. And so when I figured out in my plots that the seeding rate was we were using basically the same seeding rate based off of weight, that I was actually planting somewhere around 75% or 75% of what the recommended would be just based on weight. So to correct all of that, if you go back to if you actually go to planting 1.2 million seeds per acre, and again, I'm missing a piece of my chart here. Is there a way to move this? Oh yeah, look at there. Boom. So a good example, so looking through all these varieties, if you base it off 100 pounds per acre, just let me explain the chart and I'll quit mumbling, but this is the actual plants per acre that you're actually planting based off just weight. But then we go in here and you look at, if I was trying to shoot for the target of 1.2 million pounds, I'm only getting 75% of that recommended population. In some cases, we're like Gainer here, I'm getting over 11%. So you're actually planting higher than your target. But so this is how we made the adjustment. This is the actual correct planting rate for that particular variety. Again, you can do third grade math and figure out what you need to plant. But since we started looking at this, I've always made the recommendations made on plant population per acre and more than pounds per acre. Triticale is unique in this case because specifically in the US again, because we don't actually sell the commodity. The seed itself is not a commodity. And when you sell wheat, what's the first thing they do when they sell wheat over the scales is they actually measure test weight. And that's the very first thing they want to dock you on because it's a deduction program when you're growing wheat in the US. So if your variety is not up to snuff on test weight, then the customer's going to get docked. And if you have naturally a low test weight variety, then they're not going to quit growing it. Triticale is since it's not a commodity, I don't look at test weight as much. I find what the minimum is for that variety, and if it produces, it's a pretty small range, pretty big range, but as long as it produces above the low end, I'm okay moving it forward. So I don't select heavily for test weight, and that's the reason why we have this vast array of different seed sizes for our portfolio. Any questions? Perfect. I know you're asking a question about fertility. I don't get into fertility a lot with individual areas because there's so many different fertility practices. If you've grown wheat, you can easily grow triticale and using pretty much the same fertility practices as you would for a grain product. The only difference is there's certain practices where you'll put fertilizer on towards the later part of the year or stage of the crop to try to boost protein in the seed. In this case, you're not trying to produce, we're not producing seed. Hopefully you're chopping somewhere in the soft dose stages or beyond or before that. And so I don't really spend a lot of time talking about this is the perfect fertility practice or not, but nitrogen, it is a scavenger crop, so it will scavenge nitrogen better than most cases. It does remove significantly more phosphorus from the soil if you've got lagoon water situations. And I didn't get into that because I could spend an hour talking about that specifically, but in general, just treat it similar practices as you would any of your small grains that you grow in that same season. You'll have pretty good success with it. But in most cases, what I see problems with is I get these calls from customers that tell me they have a nitrogen deficiency and it starts their crop's really looking terrible. And these are the pictures from examples of those types of situations. And it's never, I don't think I've been on a call once when the solution was, it was actually a nitrogen deficiency. It's always been a sulfur deficiency. And again, in the US, we put in a bunch of government laws that basically required us to start cleaning our air up. So when we cleaned our air pollution up, we got rid of all our free sulfur that we were getting from the atmosphere from our dirty, nasty air from production of power plants and other things. So we're starting to see more soils become deficient in sulfur. So every time I start looking at these issues, you just have to know the differences between what a nitrogen deficient plant looks like and a sulfur deficient plant. And basically, chlorosis exhibits in the younger and uppermost leaves, but they're basically uniform. And what you'll see in some of the nitrogen deficiencies, you'll actually start seeing once it gets past the initial stage of deficiency, you'll actually see marginal edges on the turn a little bit brown and crispy. And that's probably more of a nitrogen deficiency. There's so many things that you can do to correct this, but I always recommend applying sulfur when at planting, mainly because sulfur is actually cheaper. Elemental sulfur is significantly cheaper and cost effective than actually applying something like ammonium sulfate. There is some issues with ammonium sulfate. Now, the elemental sulfur has to go on pre-plant because there's an oxidation and all these things that have to happen in the soil for that sulfur to be available to the plant and to create and to get taken up. But if you have a problem like the people here with the cattle picture do, this is not a elemental sulfur correction. This would take too long to correct this problem. If it took 35, 40, even 60 days, depending on your soil temperatures and all these things for it to oxidize and to actually become available with it, that crop is probably going to fall off so far that you won't be able to rescue it. So ammonium sulfate is recommended to correct a sulfur deficiency issue just because it's readily available to the crop very quickly. But I always recommend, try to steer away from it. Try not to use high rates of ammonium sulfate just because it lowers your soil pH. It's just a corrective action, in my opinion. Any questions on that? I feel like I'm going really fast trying to not drag this out. All right, harvest timing. I talk Zadox. I don't know. I know a lot of people get used to the Feeks or Ficus, and I'm not even sure I even say it right for certain regions of the U.S. Everybody has a different pronunciation of it, but I use Zadox, and because plant breeders are always looking at the plant from day one until it matures, I like the long, lengthy individual segregation of multiple numbers, where Feeks basically uses 12 or 13 numbers. I like the fact that Zadox, I can really narrow it down to a few days based on those numbers. But this is just an example of what I look when I'm talking Zadox numbers. You can kind of use this chart as a basis to figure this out. So here's your harvest timing. Stage 8 in this picture is essentially 37 in this one. And again, 10 is basically boot stage. What we see for yield advantages is from flag leaf all the way up until early to mid boot, even early flowering, somewhere in that stage, you'll actually see a 35% yield increase in that time period. The key takeaway here is you got to know what your end product is. Do you want sufficient forage tonnage, but you want to increase your forage value to its highest peak at that point? Or do you just want the highest tonnages you can get and be okay sacrificing some quality? So between Zadox 40, and which is right around that flag leaf all the way till soft dough, you can get that really high increase of yield, but you have to decide what your quality value is. And in this example, in the U.S., specifically in the eastern part of the U.S., we have dairies that want really high product that they're going to feed straight to their milk cows and put in their ration. They're going to harvest that flag leaf stage. As soon as that flag leaf completely emerges, they're going to cut it. And that way they can add the boost of protein at that stage, and the TDN numbers are really high, fiber contents highly digestible at that point. So that's when they really like to cut that. But if you come down to the plain states, you're going to see some of our feed yards, they just want mass tonnage and they don't need all that extra value because they're not trying to get milk, increase milk letdown or actually keep up with milk letdown. They're just trying to put pounds of beef on. So they'll move it all the way as far as in the soft dough stages. So you got to kind of figure out what your end product is to know, what time you want to cut it at. This is a harvest stage study that I did in 2020. I get that we know that this is pretty much right on. I've just told people, as you persist through the soft dough stages, you get higher increases of tonnage. But I wanted numbers to actually to sit down and really see what those numbers were. So I put all these varieties together and we did this harvest stage, and you can just see the difference between how much yield you're giving up at flag leaf stage versus if you push this product all the way in the soft dough. And I would say somewhere in this boot stage is where most of our dairies in the plains harvest, because at this stage you can get a little more increase from flag leaf to boot. You're not giving up as much of a quality moving forward, but you start losing quality pretty significantly getting into the flowering stages. All right, so here's the perfect example of that teeter-totter effect. As tonnage goes up for us in this same study again, but we measured protein. As you progress, your tonnage go up, but so does your protein tanks the other direction. So you're starting to give up everything. At every stage, you're giving a little more up on protein. And then your RFQ values, again, we work with a lot of dairies, so they look at this RFQ value. Depends on which ruminant nutritionist you're talking to that day, whether if that's the holy grail of numbers or there's some other number, but it's pretty consistent. They look at an RFQ number as to measure overall quality. But again, same study, RFQ numbers start creeping down here. Just a lot of it's got to do with just fiber content goes up and it becomes a little less digestible. So again, figure out which stage you want to harvest at. But here's the caveat. Is TDN. I know a lot of people look at TDN and use that as a factor to look at quality, but what RFQ doesn't actually consider is starch content. So you look at the Western US and specifically in California, those dairies all harvest at soft dough stage. And they over time they've just adopted that particular stage because they like this additional starch content that you get. So the reason why TDN drops and then takes a quick peak here at soft dough is because you actually get some starch content from the carbohydrates from the actual soft dough seed that you have in the head. So higher yielding, higher grain yielding type trits will increase your carbohydrate content at this stage. But again, your fiber content is going to be higher at this stage. Lignin is going to increase and protein is going to decrease. So you got to figure out what your goals are. Are you milkers? Are you putting on pounds? Are you just trying to feed, just keep cattle alive, essentially? All right, here's where some data. I put this data table together, and a little bit. Some of this will translate, maybe some of it won't. But this is a trial that we ran for several years in Othello, Washington, which is the eastern, more arid region of the state of Washington. At that time, we were actually really the only on-list product on the market was this Maryland variety, which we actually own that Maryland variety at the time, and we were just trying to just get a better, higher yielding product with better quality. And over the years, I guess it was probably in just a 4-year time period where we actually started selecting for those higher tilling varieties. But we jumped this number up about 0.6 of a ton per acre. For some people, that doesn't sound like a large amount, but I've been breeding forages for a while, and that's a pretty significant jump when you're looking at increasing your genetic potential. So we thought we had a good win there. That's really where that first product was trying to go, was We needed a spring product for that area. That's predominantly a fall planted area, but we do have some customers that like that spring planting window. It fits their program a little bit better. Again, Wisconsin, not sure this will translate for you guys either, but just a good example of this product. Predominant product in that region was this TriCal 141. That is an unleaded variety, and generally in the past, unleaded and fully on varieties out yielded all of our onless lines. So the fact that we increased 0.3 of a ton, or even got the same amount of yield out of a truly onless line versus an unleaded, it was a big win for us. So that's when we decided this product surge actually has a really good potential of something that's going to be viable in the marketplace. And then Montana, this probably translates more for you guys, and especially in Alberta. We didn't start looking at other crops specifically. And then I had a couple of guys go, look, we need to start looking at other crops. We know the trits are good. You're currently being competitive with the current trits in the market, or you surpassed their yields. That's fantastic. But we want to know what the difference is for other crops. So we started looking at oats, because that was the first recommendation from the customers that were growing oats, and see if we could actually get better yields than oats. And this oat is actually one of the locally grown oats for Montana. And we basically demonstrated to them that the tonnage is there. It's a little better in oat. And our forage quality should be pretty consistent with the oat in that region. We are going to add barley. We're going to add barley to our lineup, but I'll be quite honest with you. I don't know there's any other small grain crop that can beat barley's quality. The reason barley falls down a lot as a forage product is because its lignin content is pretty low. So you take something that's naturally low in lignin, it's not going to be the greatest thing to stand up to give you that big biomass. So we'll add barley to our testing in the future and see if we can get on par. But unless something really cool comes out of our program that has a pretty significant jump in quality, I don't know our quality content or our digestibility content is going to be higher than barley. And you can see here these heading dates versus oat. Surge is kind of considered what I would call a mid-maturity line. Probably against the Canadian varieties, it's probably going to be a later maturing. You guys can have a little more experience with it, can elaborate on that, but we're really shooting for. I like to stay around this surge maturity because it kind of fits some of these guys that are trying to do double cropping on that acre, so it still gives them time to get that second crop in. The additional thing is most of these trials from plant to harvest was about 55 to 60 days. So that time period from time you plant it till time you can harvest it, that's kind of the time period you're looking at with this particular line. All right. I did it. And I did it under the hour.
Thank you. That was great.
That was really good. Sorry, there was a question earlier in the chat.
Oh yeah, do you want to ask it, Brian?
Yep. Can you comment on the low frequency of ond and onlet plants that we observed in Alberta last year? Are they just genetic anomalies, or is that something that's consistent?
You're talking about, that's probably when we're trying to get the PBR through. So there is some Triticale does have some outcrossing. It'll outcross more than wheat will. Naturally, Triticale has a receptivity window for when it can get pollinated that runs into about 18 days, where wheat has about a 4-day receptivity window. So if you're getting poor pollination during that time, it'll naturally open up. So there is some outcrossing that happens. I'm assuming and I don't even know where the seed sources were for those trials, but for the most part, you'll see some. It's not necessarily genetic drift because we don't have we don't have the genetic drift where you'll see it's actually the onless part is slipping back into an on, just because it's got there's 6 loci within the genetics. It's pretty strong onless control mechanisms that keep it that true onless. So if anything, we start seeing off types in there, it's either mechanical handling or there had been some kind of crossing or out crossing. On our unleaded material, now you guys don't have any of this, but you may see some in the marketplace in the next couple of years. Our unleaded material, the on length varies depending on how much abiotic pressure they have on them. So like a really dry, hot spring may actually increase the on length by, a half an inch, where it was normally like an eighth of an inch long. It might be as long as 3/4 of an inch. And then everybody's throwing their hands up like, oh my gosh, something's happened to my product. But basically it's an abiotic stress response for things like heat stress and drought stress. But you wouldn't see that much in the fully onless varieties.
Thank you.
So Greg or Brian, this is Rick Love calling. It's just so for the seed growers on the call, just to know the official variety description of TriCal Surge allows for less than 1% on and onletted plants. So that's important for seed growers. And with the 2023 certified or pedigreed production, I think every one of the inspected fields, we did have to go and point out to the National Office, Canadian Seed Growers Association, point them back to the official description and work our way through some concerns they had from the crop inspection report. So I think we were successful in all cases, but as Racey has mentioned, there's also abiotic factors that, in my experience with Triticale, this is not a TriCal Surge thing. This was Triticale. We also observed some instances of taller plants in that canopy that were noted by crop inspectors as off types, but I don't think there should be any notable concerns about this variety relative to any other Triticales that I've seen. So Racey, if you might want to comment, you know your germplasm better than any of us, I think.
Sure. What we see is, and Triticale is an overexpressor of everything. So in areas where I can take this crop, I try to clean my lines up and increase them for first commercialization in an environment that we get overexpression. And sometimes if I can't get them in an area of overexpression, I'll miss something that would overexpress in an abiotic environment. So that's why I describe those products the way they are, because Triticale naturally has this overexpression, and usually it's in the form of talls, or it's in the form of longer ons in the cases that it should be significantly shorter. I've been working with Trit for 13 years now, and I'll be honest with you, it's a weird crop. It will, when you think you got it figured out, it'll kick you in the teeth and let you know that it's running the show. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that, because I pretty much describe all my crops or all my varieties with 1% or less of off types. And because I do see those off types randomly in different environments, it's hard to say, well, in this state we saw this many, this state it was less, or this state we didn't see. So it's really hard to describe the different environments and how Triticale expresses. And I think it's also tough because Triticale, specifically our trits, Triticale as a crop period, has such a wide adaptation window. So you can't always see every one of those. You can't predict also exactly how it's going to react in those environments till you actually put them in those. And if you look at a wheat program, you release wheat varieties for I call them microclimates. One wheat variety might go in 100 100-mile square radius, and then you go to there's another one that's got a larger radius, but really they're in these microclimates developed. And I can take one triticale and plant it in Texas, and also every state in between, and put it in Alberta and have success with it. So that's the adaptation is significant on them. That's a long-winded way of saying the expression is really hard to gauge what it's going to do in every area. And we try to do our best to describe those varieties with the, at the rate we've seen some of those over or under expressions.
Thank you. I don't think we saw any talls in our field, but some of what Rick talked about we did see. So the question from Ron here in the chat, if a person was going to use the triticale for baling green feed for wintering cows, so they're going to bale it up as green feed for wintering cows, when would you cut it? So I'm thinking cow-calf type operation situation.
Sure. So predominantly when that head comes out, as soon as that head comes out, that's when I like to put it in a bale.
As it's leaving the boot, basically.
Yeah, so just past the boot, like fully headed, so it'll be like Zadok 60 before it flowers. So sometime before it flowers, you're like the protein will still be there, because a lot of times when you're rolling up in the hay, you want good digestible feed, right? But you're not trying to get those really high starch contents like you would if you were going to soft dough. So your protein levels at that point are still pretty high and significant. So I would suggest just as soon as the head's fully emerged, and then cut it. Then you can get a little better bump in protein if you're at early boot stage, but sometimes within, if you wait a week, sometimes you might increase the overall yield by 5 or 6%. Just waiting another week, because triticale is fast. When it takes off, decides it's growing, it's going.
Would a dairy be similar kind of timing, would you say there?
Yeah, and like I said before, you got to know what you want your feed for. So a lot of our guys that are only feeding dry cows, they'll push it to soft dough because they don't really care about all of that extra low fiber number. So if you're trying to feed a milker, I would recommend between flag leaf and boot. Flag leaf is the sweet spot for putting it into high quality feed directly in for milkers, current milkers. The southern hotter parts of the U.S., they see this what they call a summer slump, because it gets real hot. And those cows are just fighting all day long trying to produce milk and cool their bodies at the same time. So what they've seen is with the cutting at the flag leaf stage, if that product's quality is highest at that stage, they avoid that summer slump by adding that to the ration during them hot months, because the nutrient value is higher at that stage.
Okay. As far as seeding rates goes, I'm trying to think exactly what our rate ended up being, but I want to say it was like in that 22 to 25 plants per square foot is what our rate ended up being this spring. But we've had times where we've planted some, wheats or triticales as high as 40 plants per square foot. So, and that's like that at 40, you're like 1.7 million seeds per acre, right? So definitely on the higher end. When we're doing that though, we're using growth regulator, like a PGR. Do you have anyone in the States using growth regulators to make some of these stand up under higher fertility, or is that not a thing?
Yes. The only people that use growth regulators for our program is the seed producer.
Okay.
In the Pacific Northwest, we have a pretty large area that we use a lot of our increases at, and that's southern Idaho. And they're very high yielding area. They got fantastic soils, great environment, great water, so on and so forth. So they use growth regulators. Some of them are even thinking about giving them 2 shots. Now, I don't know I don't know what products are registered in Canada, but we have a couple products here that actually are labeled to hit them with two different stages. So The problem with growth regulators are if you don't get it right in that stage, you're spraying for no reason because you've already missed your window to actually have any effect on the plant. So, but the guys that have it down, some of them are even putting two different applications of growth regulators on them.
I'd have to check on
Um,
registration to see to make sure these are actually registered on Triticale in Canada. That's something I'll have to follow up with.
yeah. So we have a product called Palisade. I don't know if that's in Canada, but it's obviously that's a brand name, not an active ingredient, but that's probably the go-to for most of our seed producers is to use that product. It works pretty well. Again, you've got like a 5-day window to hit that first application. If you get past that, then you're not doing any good to the crop. Um, we've tried some lower seeding rates. Sometimes you can get away with going down to like 900,000 seeds per acre. And do some quick math here. Yeah, so like 20 seeds per square foot. Which what'd you say your lowest was?
I think my lowest was either 22 or 25 that it ended up
Yeah,
being just on seed size and what was available.
sure. So sometimes we've seen them go 20 as low as 20 seeds to uh, to produce grain crop. It'll make up for some tillering, but for whatever reason, sometimes sometimes it seems to make the plant a little sturdier at that lower rate. I don't, a lot of times it's usually the stem. The stem gets a little bit bigger, has an opportunity to become a little bigger than like if you're really crowding it, you're wanting a smaller, thinner stem. No different than planting, grain, forage sorghums. You can hit that population rate on the high end and make some of those stems a little smaller. Um, I think really the success rate though has been the Palisade.
So yeah, sure. For a forage person, so say well, I mean, there's two different things. We've got dryland customers and irrigation customers, and kind of two different things going on, right? So, what kind of a suggested plants per square foot or seeds per acre, say on a real dry situation, extremely dry, versus say an irrigated customer
Yeah, so
for forage?
that's what I talk about. Our aerated or really arid environments. Some of those guys go down as low as 900,000 seeds per acre, and I'm sure some of them are fudging that number and going lower. But
Yeah,
some of our studies have showed kind of 900,000 is that sweet spot for forage. You can still, there's still room for it to put on a significant amount of tillering. And I don't have a ton of studies where we've done this on really arid environments with seeding rate studies. We've done it a couple times with our hybrid program, just trying to figure out seeding rate for hybrids. But we did see that there's an advantage to keep it at least 900,000. Again, your irrigated guys can go all the way up to 1.4, 1.6 or something like that. And really there's an advantage to that as well.
okay. Could you say someone was doing a hybrid fall rye and they're going to silage that off in June here? Typically, they're double cropping to oats and they're planting oats in early July timeframe. Could you plant this surge after that and get yourself to boot or past boots come October, or maybe just not enough experience? I mean, maybe Montana would kind of compare similarly here, but we have a lot of people that are double cropping to oats on irrigation.
Sure. I don't know that we've ever done it that late. I've had a couple people ask me the same question, and I've never tried it because it's always such a small group of customers that want to try it. But I would assume still, if you're in July, is that when you're thinking like planning July?
Yeah, it'd be like very early July
Yeah,
timeframe.
so
And then some years you can get all the way to October without much of a frost. And so some
yep.
people had oats that were fully headed out this past year. Now, problem is every year is so different. You might get a year where we get a big snow mid-October, and some years you haven't had frost by then, right?
Sure,
So it's
sure.
just such a kind of a bit of a hit and miss. But I mean, they're doing the oats. It's like, would this be as good or better?
Yeah,
and maybe even with less water, like they might be, say they're shut off on water. Maybe this is better than an oat if they can't irrigate anymore because of the situation we're in up here.
sure. I can't give you definitive yes because again, I've never tried it, but I don't see why it wouldn't work. Um,
We'll try
I
and
would,
find someone.
yeah. Well, I was thinking about, you made a comment on frost. What's unique about surge is it's a facultative that just doesn't have a real high rate of cold tolerance. Um, I didn't talk much about facultative, but we plant surge all the way up into northern Kansas fall plant, and it gets through the winter fine, and then they harvest it. So it actually has some cold tolerance, just not strong cold tolerance for our northern environments. So this one should have a better frost tolerance. Not saying it's frost proof, but it should tolerate the cold a little better than some of your true springs.
It's interesting. That makes me wonder if you had frost in, late September and it was growing, it would just kind of tolerate that and keep going until November, like it just kind of
Yep.
keep rolling. So maybe that's something angle to consider on that actually as a double
Yep.
crop versus oats.
Yep.
Well, that
Anytime
makes
you
me
get the
think.
growing, anytime you get the growing point above the ground and you hit it with a frost, depending on how tough your frost is, there's risk to damage. If it's just a light frost, not a big deal. You get one of those big, heavy dipping down below where it's almost a freeze, it's almost a hard freeze, and that's gonna kill it for sure. But
Okay.
you know,
Okay. Anyone else have any other questions there, or Brian, Blair, anyone else on the call? While we're waiting for that, I would just comment, for us, probably potential market, like from our situation, would be maybe mainly people just going for tonnage, that beef feedlot that's just finishing beef. And so mainly people are just going for tonnage, but maybe 25% of our customers would be in that for that quality or that cow calf or dairy or those types of customers. So as far as total sales type of thing,
sure.
I guess one comment on the double cropping. For like the difference between oats, like would Triticale have an uptake of nitrates with a possible frost like oats do, or?
Yeah, so the few trials we've tested nitrate accumulation, and Triticale actually had, at least our lines. Again, I can only speak for TriCal in this sense, just because most of our material had less. There was one variety in specific that I could see that actually had a higher content than I was comfortable with, but most of them had lower nitrate accumulation compared to things like oat and even some of the spring wheats.
Okay.
I wish I knew exactly the science behind why. I haven't spent a ton of time figuring out why, but in the instances where we've seen it, it's been and a lot of that is mostly on farm top. It's not like I put a trial together and figured out how to force nitrate accumulation. Most of that's on farm. Hey, we had these 3 species planted here, and we measured them all. And they all were, they all had these levels.
Okay.
Well, if anyone has any questions before we wrap up, just unmute or state your question. Brian, any last comments or Blair? Or?
Well, I'd just like to thank you, Greg and Blair, for putting this on. It's been really informative. And thank you so much to Racey for joining us. It was great information. We really appreciate it.
You bet.
Yeah, I really appreciate you, Racey, coming on here. You always learn something from someone else, especially when they're even from a different region. Like it's just like, oh, I never thought about it from that angle because you're dealing with different stuff than we are possibly, but sometimes that just really carries over into another region where something we didn't think about, so really appreciate that. Okay, well, with that, this will be posted on YouTube by midday, so you can share it with your friends from there. And yeah, we'll thank everyone for joining, and thanks all for coming. We'll end the meeting now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.